อเชิญทุกท่านเข้าร่วมรับฟังการบรรยายสาธารณะหัวข้อวิธีการตีความในทางการศึกษานโยบายสาธารณะนะคะ
Hello and good afternoon. This is the 12th Thai Humanities Forum, sponsored by the, I'm not sure the new name, the TSRI, the Thailand Science and Research Innovation, I think. Yes, and today's event is co-hosted by Chiang Mai University, the School of Public Policy, and our school, the Graduate School of Public Administration, NIDA, right? Today I make a very brief introduction to our speakers, right? Can you please? Professor Hendrik Wagenaar, right? Wagenaar, right? He's from King's College, London. But nowadays you are living in the Vienna. Yeah, based in Vienna, right? And also let me also introduce Assistant Professor Piyapong from Chiang Mai University and Dr. Popsuk as well from Chiang Mai University. With us today, we also have Professor Kasesan, Dr. Ari, and also Professor Ploy as a discussion, right? So now I shall hand it over to Dr. Popsuk she is the moderator, right? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will do my work properly. So I will speak in both English and in Thai. So firstly, I would like to introduce Professor Hendrik Wagenaar. So he wrote very important 2 books. So the first one is Meaning in Action, Interpretation and Dialogue in Public Policy Analysis. And the second one, Deliberate Policy Analysis, Understanding Governance in the Network Society. So this is the book that is very well known and also like very important in the field of public policy. And today, as Ajahn Tinitat have said, so we have like the host. This program is under the 12th Thai Humanities Forum, and we work in collaboration with the GSPA NIDA and our School of Public Policy Chiang Mai University. So today is going to be a bit informal way to have like this kind of public lecture. So I would like to encourage you to like feel free to like relaxing and enjoy the talk, thing like that. So the sequence is going to be the first 2 hours. Professor Hendrik is going to give a lecture and going to be translated by Professor Piyapong for the key point. So you're not going to misunderstand or everything for Thai audience. And after that, we're going to have like a very informal discussion about the reflection on the thing that Professor Hendrik have talked. And the snack box will be provided in the room. So it's quite important to mention. So it's not gonna have like a very proper break. So if you would like to go somewhere and come back, so it's feel free. But yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna give the microphone and the floor to Professor Hendrik Wagenaar. Please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you, Popsuk. I'm going to begin with thanking a lot of people, and so many that I have to write it down so I don't get it wrong, for being here. So the first, of course, is the 12th Humanities Forum, the program that made it possible for me to come to Thailand and speak in different venues, among other things, here at the Graduate School of Public Administration. And that is then my second thank you, big thank you, that the Graduate School of Public Administration at NIDA invited me to, did me the honor to give a talk here about the work that I'm doing in interpretive and deliberative policy analysis. Then, of course, the School of Public Policy at Chiang Mai University, in particular, my very gracious and tireless hosts, Popsung, Samsung, and Piyapong Busabong. They have been, chaperoning me now for over a week, and I feel very, very welcome. And then my illustrious discussants here, Professors Ari, Ploy, Kasum Soren, sorry about my pronunciation, and Will, of course, who was here to greet us, and appreciate it very, very much. I'm going to talk today about, let me see if I can get the slides up. Oh. Wait. Yes. Can you help me here to find the other one? Sorry, I'm such a clutch with these things. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk today about interpretive methods in policy analysis, and with actually an emphasis on more on deliberative policy analysis, but I will explain that in a minute. I was told for this particular lecture that there would be a special interest in methods, how to do it, and I think it's, of course, an incredibly important question. We tend to become very abstract very easily, and but I try to keep it very concrete. So I will organize a talk around a specific case of policy making and policy analysis that I have been involved in for many years, over 15 years now, and it will be prostitution policy. I've done a lot of research on this. I wrote books on it, not because prostitution policy, I think, is the biggest problem in the world, although it's a pretty big problem in many countries, including this one, if I'm correct. But I think prostitution policy is representative of many, in a structural sense, of many other policy issues, like climate change or inequality or congested cities, you name it. So that will be my topic, and I will walk you through the argument. I might have too many slides, and I will skip a few. If you think anything is unclear, feel free to raise your hand and stop me right in my tracks. I like to be interrupted, and I will try to explain it better. If you don't mind, I take off my jacket. It's pretty warm here, and then I can get started. All right. So yesterday, before I fell asleep, I suddenly was involved in a bit of a Twitter fight. Those things happen, right? You open your Twitter account and you think, what? And so this was about prostitution policy in the Netherlands. At the moment, the Dutch government, let me see if we can get, oh, it's too far. Yes. The Dutch government has proposed a very punitive law, and I will talk about a bit about the background in a minute, a very punitive law that is being sent to Parliament shortly. And there's a lot to do from the community of sex workers and sex worker activists, but also NGOs who are very, very critical of this law. And what I witnessed was a little interview with a member of Parliament for the Christian Conservative Party who promote this law, who was arguing, saying, yeah, 90% of the women in this field, they are coerced, and this is why we have this law. The law wants, as I already wrote there, this is October 2019, they want to register all sex workers. So that's a big problem because of privacy issues and protection for the law. You lose a lot of your privacy, and particularly for sex workers, which is a highly stigmatized profession. That's a big issue. But the woman said, no, 90% are coerced, so we need to have this law. So I wrote a little response to this tweet, and I said 90% are coerced. Where does that number come from? I don't know of any single scientific study that comes up with this number. In fact, our own work and that of others shows that maybe 5% at best suffer from any form of coercion. But the interviewer didn't even challenge that, and I said, so where are the interviewers? To my surprise, I couldn't fall asleep anymore because my phone kept buzzing because of all the retweets and the likes that were coming in. Why do I tell you this? Because this is very, very typical for what's going on in a lot of policy fields. So when I came here this morning, I saw the slogan of NIDA, wisdom for change, and I thought, exactly. That's what we need, more wisdom. Because wisdom is hard to find at the moment in many policy fields. Many policy fields are very ideological or ideologized, maybe I should say. This is no exception. But also in climate change, climate change deniers. People just don't want to believe the facts in front of their eyes. Austerity, if you are familiar with this, which makes economically no sense at all. has been proven. Yet government after government implements austerity plans with terrible effects on the economy and on working people's situation. And I can go on. So we need a little bit more wisdom. And that's why I chose the case, not because I was familiar with your slogan, which I think is a brilliant slogan, but because the case is so representative of many, many other policy fields, as I said, and also because I happen to know a lot about it, so I can talk about it with some confidence. Do I talk too fast? No? Okay. All right. So let me give you a bit of background, and then I go to my own work on interpretive and deliberative policy analysis. So in October 2003, the Dutch parliament, the same parliament that now proposes this punitive law, well, different people, but they decriminalized prostitution in the Netherlands. But they decriminalized it by making brothels a legal business. So prostitution itself was legal. You could always offer sexual services to someone and it wasn't criminal, but you couldn't run a business that way. That changed in 2003, and the purpose was to make it a regular small, medium business sector and then subject it to the laws that apply to small and medium-sized businesses and no longer criminal law. It meant in practice that the government decentralized the whole policy to municipalities because they said that is where prostitution happens. That's where sex work takes place. It's a local market. And they also created a system of licensing. So if you wanted to run a legal sex business, you had to have a license. So that was sort of the law. And then in October 2019, in the meantime, by the way, things changed for the worse. So suddenly now the government wants to criminalize it again. You have to register as a sex worker, not as a business, but as an individual sex worker. Then a civil servant will assess if you are able to work independently as a sex worker. I don't know how civil servants can do that, but they think they can. If you're not registered and you still work, you get a fine of 20,000 euros, which is a lot of money that women can't pay, obviously. Clients that go to a sex worker that are not, this is all proposal, who are not licensed, they can get a 1-year jail sentence. And in addition, and that's not in the law, but that's now local policy, a number of sites where sex workers can work has been reduced enormously. So the government wants to get rid of sex work. That's what it is. Okay, so I will come back to the case throughout my talk, so to tell you a bit how that fits with the kind of work we do. The case is interesting, I think, because it has all the characteristics of contemporary public policy. It's very complex. Lots of different actors, lots of different sites, events at the global level like migration streams, they impact on the local level, and there's a lot of turbulence. It changes all the time. The whole thing is incredibly decentered. There are literally hundreds of actors who somehow have an influence on this particular policy. Not just state officials, in fact they're almost the less important ones, but lots and lots of civil society actors, NGOs, brothel owners, you name it, ordinary citizens. I should also say, I forgot to put it on there, this is a policy that operates in the dark, not because it's illegal, but because we have no data. I will talk a little bit about that later. Literally, you have no data. So when this particular parliamentarian says 90% is coerced, she makes those data up, like this. There are no data. We did very careful research. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. We don't even know actually how many sex workers are active in the Netherlands. We don't. It changes by the day. So the whole policy is incredibly ideologically charged. So there are two camps. One is, frames public policy as trafficking. All the women are coerced. We have to fight trafficking, and so on and so on. And the other side, mostly the sex workers and their advocates, and I belong to that camp. I'll be open about it. They say, no, 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 it's just regular work. It's maybe not ordinary work. It's not normal work. I don't say that. But it's work, and it should be treated as such, with labor laws and fines for brothel owners. I'll finish this and then who exploit the workers. And it involves a marginal and vulnerable population. Many policies do these days. You know, we're talking about people who are low-income people, or people who are unemployed, or precarious workers. A lot of policies involve very vulnerable populations these days. How do we deal with that as a government? I give the floor to Pong. Oh, you have one? Okay.
Professor Hendrik ตั้งต้นด้วยการชี้ให้เห็นว่าทำไมเราจะต้องศึกษาวิจัยในเชิงคุณภาพนะครับโดยอาศัยการตีความคุณค่าแล้วก็มุมมองที่แตกต่างหลากหลายนะครับหนึ่งก็เป็นเพราะว่าประเด็นหลายๆประเด็นเนี่ยมันเป็นประเด็นที่สลับซับซ้อนนะครับมันไม่สามารถที่จะเอาเข้าสู่สูตรสมการแล้วก็ได้คำตอบมาง่ายๆโดยที่Professor Hendrik เนี่ยก็ได้ยกตัวอย่างจากงานวิจัยที่ทำมาก็คือเรื่องของนโยบายการบริหารจัดการเรื่องการค้าประเวณีนะครับซึ่งยกตัวอย่างที่ประเทศเนเธอร์แลนด์นะครับซึ่งในช่วงแรกเนี่ยก็จะใช้วิธีการในการให้บริหารจัดการกันได้นะครับในระดับท้องถิ่นแต่ว่าหลังจากนั้นเนี่ยก็มีการเปลี่ยนแปลงในเชิงนโยบายนะครับที่มีความเข้มงวดมากขึ้นนะครับโดยอาจจะมองง่ายๆนะครับจากการใช้ตัวเลขหยาบๆว่านะครับเอาตัวเลขอ้างขึ้นมาแล้วก็บริหารจัดการโดยอิงแค่เสียงส่วนใหญ่นะครับแล้วก็ไม่ได้สนใจคนชายขอบนะครับที่ได้รับผลกระทบจากนโยบายดังกล่าวนะครับทำให้เป็นเหมือนจุดตั้งไข่นะครับในการชวนคิดว่าโจทย์แบบนี้เนี่ยเราจะศึกษาในเชิงปริมาณแบบที่เป็นปกติได้ไหมหรือว่าจริงๆแล้วเราต้องดูอีกมิติหนึ่งนะครับซึ่งก็คือการวิจัยในเชิงคุณภาพที่ให้ความสำคัญกับการตีความมุมมองคุณค่าที่แตกต่างหลากหลายนะครับเดี๋ยวก็คงจะไปถึงจุดนั้นนะครับซึ่งกรณีที่ยกขึ้นมาเนี่ยมันมีลักษณะเด่นก็คือมันสะท้อนถึงความสลับซับซ้อนของปรากฏการณ์ทางนโยบายในยุคปัจจุบันได้ดีครับซึ่งนอกเหนือจากเป็นเรื่องการค้าประเวณีเนี่ยก็อาจจะรวมไปถึงเรื่องอื่นๆอย่างเช่นเรื่องของภาวะโลกร้อนที่ Professor Hendrik ก็ได้ยกขึ้นมาเป็นตัวอย่างนิดๆหน่อยๆเหมือนกันนะครับซึ่งประเด็นนี้เนี่ยมันมีนะครับทั้งความสลับซับซ้อนนะครับทั้งมีลักษณะที่ไม่มีศูนย์กลางที่ชัดเจนนะครับไม่ว่าจะเป็นเรื่องของใครกันแน่นะครับหน่วยงานไหนกันแน่นะครับหรือว่าจริงๆแล้วมันเกี่ยวข้องกับหลายภาคส่วนนะครับแล้วก็เป็นเรื่องที่เกี่ยวข้องกับมุมมองด้วยก็คือเรื่อง ideological เนี่ยก็หมายว่าเป็นเรื่องอุดมคติมุมมองที่แตกต่างนะครับในสังคมซึ่งขัดแย้งกันอยู่นะครับไม่ได้เป็นแค่ข้อเท็จจริงที่ปรากฏออกมาข้างหน้าอย่างเดียวว่าเป็นเรื่องของความคิดของผู้คนด้วยและที่สำคัญมันเป็นเรื่องของกลุ่มเปราะบางนะครับซึ่งแน่นอนถ้าเราทำนโยบายบนฐานของตัวเลขกลุ่มนี้ก็ต้องเป็นตัวเลขที่ออกมาเป็นสัดส่วนน้อยอยู่แล้วนะครับ
So, what I will do today is walk you through some of the methods we use in sort of what I tend to call contemporary policy analysis. And most of it comes out of a book we published in 2003, my colleague Martin Heyer and myself, called Deliberative Policy Analysis. And that field is now developing very rapidly. So one of the nice things that is disseminating, so spreading to other parts of the world, like China. There's a deliberative policy analysis lab in Beijing with Yali, and here in Thailand, Busabong and Cham Chong, officially author names in Chiang Mai, doing a lot of work on this. And we also see a significant reformulation of the original statement, which I will talk about. So, this is very briefly the structure. I will give you a short summary of the original statement, then tell you what happened since, then I will talk about these three methods: design deliberative platforms, enhancing the deliberative capacity of policy systems, and integrated governance. And then I will sort of wrap up with a kind of summary as deliberative policy analysis as design in practice. That will be the story. This is the book. And you have to sort of, one way to get to the book is to tell the story of how I got there. So I've been trained as a policy scholar and a policy analyst, and I started my career doing quantitative research. I developed measures from measuring the outcome of mental health service systems, not treatment, but whole systems. And so it was a lot of work. We developed these measures. We did a lot of psychometric testing, and then we compared mental health systems. I did that in the United States, where I was trained. And so you compare, for example, inpatient care with community mental health care on dimensions such as, well, mental health, obviously, depression scales, positive mental health, or how optimistic are you, and so on and so on. Physical health also. So I did a lot of that work for a number of years. I enjoyed it a lot. I really liked it. But it has its limitations, as we all know. And one of the problems with this kind of quantitative, let's call it positivist, sometimes somewhat technocratic policy analysis is that it's very slow and it's very static. So once you had study done, then the policy had changed already to a whole different level, and you only had numbers. You never got to the experiences of the people that were involved, the stakeholders, the target audience. So I began to be interested, and I was already interested, I must say, in qualitative research, in interpretive research. So qualitative research is just a form of interpretive analysis. And that's where I started. And then also later I wrote a big book about it, but I was already doing it at the time. So my own PhD was a qualitative study of people mental patients who suffered from deinstitutionalization, meaning they could only stay in the mental hospital for a week and then were discharged, and then came back, of course. So I interviewed them, and I asked them about their lived experience. So that was what I did first, doing a lot more interpretive policy analysis. But the big problem with interpretive policy analysis, with any policy analysis, is that what is something that I call, with a bit of a big word, epistemic vulnerability. What I mean is, you can do the best study in the world. It can be very, very good, rigorous science, and rigorous applies both to quantitative and to qualitative work. You've done your very best, and then the policymaker just doesn't want to hear about it. They're not interested. They have a different opinion, right? Which happens in prostitution a lot. And in fact, even the data they don't want to hear about. So they make up their own data, like the 90% coerced. So I thought, okay, this doesn't work. We need something extra. And the extra is deliberation. So you need to sit down and do the analysis together with policymakers to overcome epistemic vulnerability. You have to work together, get policymakers to own the study, to own the analysis, to own the project. And then maybe you can overcome this problem that they don't want to hear about the results because they are part of the results in a way, right? It doesn't always work out. And in fact, it didn't work out in my case, but I tell you about it. And I also felt that very often policy analysis was not sufficiently problem-oriented. The analyst formulated the problem, but that could be far removed from how the policymakers saw the problem or the target audience. So that's why we put in practice-oriented. So focus on the world that the policymaker perceives. Try to see the world through their eyes. Stand in their shoes. And do it also actually for other parts of the world. Yeah. And then maybe you get a better type of policy analysis. So that's how we got to this. These are the three pillars, as we call them, of deliberative policy analysis. Okay.
วิธีการตีความในศตวรรษที่21ที่ได้รับการยอมรับสูงมากก็คือการตีความร่วมกันนะครับนั่นก็คือเน้นเอาผู้ที่เกี่ยวข้องเนี่ยมาพูดคุยนะครับแลกเปลี่ยนเรียนรู้มุมมองความคิดความเชื่อกันนะครับโดยมีภาษาเรียกเฉพาะคือ IDPA เนี่ยนะครับซึ่งวิธีการเช่นนี้เนี่ยมันจะขยับให้หนีจากข้อจำกัดเดิมก็คือการมีอัตตวิสัยของใครของมันใช่ไหมฮะเราก็ตีความของเราแบบนี้เพื่อนตีความแบบนั้นเนี่ยมาสู่การตีความร่วมกันก็คือจาก subjectivity เป็น intersubjectivity นะครับก็คือนอกเหนือจากตีความแล้วเนี่ยมันต้อง deliberation ก็คือมันต้องพูดง่ายๆคือตีความร่วมกันนั่นแหละนะครับมาอยู่ในวงแลกเปลี่ยนมุมมองที่แตกต่างหลากหลายโดยที่ไม่ใช่เอาแค่ตัวเลขอย่างเดียวแต่ว่าเอาความคิดอ่านนะครับก็คือเอาสิ่งที่อยู่ในหัวด้วยนะครับไม่ใช่สิ่งที่มองเห็นอย่างเดียวแต่ว่าเป็นสิ่งที่เราคิดเราเชื่อเราอยากเห็นหรือแม้กระทั่งความรู้สึกนะครับความคิดความอ่านเนี่ยออกมาแบ่งปันกันด้วยนะครับโดยตัวที่เป็น evidence ของการใช้วิธีแบบนี้เนี่ยมันจะข้ามพ้นเรื่องของการวิเคราะห์ทางสถิติเนี่ยมาสู่ไอ้เรื่องของ consensus หรือว่า argument อะไรบางอย่างเนี่ยมันจะกลายเป็น solid evidence เองนะครับแล้วก็สุดท้ายเนี่ยวิธีการแบบนี้ห้ามลอยเป็นอันขาดก็คือมันจะต้องลงมาที่เรื่องของ practice orientation ก็คือจะเน้นไปที่การตอบโจทย์อะไรบางอย่างนะครับอย่างเรื่องโจทย์เรื่องโสเภณีหรือว่าโจทย์เรื่องโลกร้อนนะครับก็คือมันจะต้องไม่ใช่อะไรที่เป็นลักษณะเป็นนามธรรมนะครับมันจะต้องลงไปสู่สิ่งที่เป็นรูปธรรมนะครับนำไปสู่การแก้ปัญหาคือตีความปัญหาแล้วก็ตีความทางออกร่วมกันนั่นเองนะครับ
Sometimes I hear you use words that I never used. Subjective and intersubjective. Anyway, I walk through this very quickly because I told you my personal story, but in the book we tell a slightly different story. We say the world has changed, the world of policy making in 2003. And it has changed because we summarized it with the term network society. So I'll just walk very briefly through it. Politics is no longer just made in the offices of bureaucrats or in parliament or in ministerial meetings. It's now made everywhere, literally, throughout society. We call that sometimes decentered policy making, new spaces of politics. Most policies are facing radical uncertainty. I will talk a bit more about it later, but already I told you in prostitution policy we don't have numbers. You're flying in the dark without instruments. There's a lot of difference and conflict in society, and particularly nowadays with social media, that is whipped up enormously. So you see that there are big ideological differences and polarization. But we also realize we are dependent upon each other. You cannot make policy on your own. You need lots and lots of different actors to pull it off. And then, of course, there's a very robust finding in political science. People don't trust politicians. They have no confidence in bureaucrats. So at the moment there are elections in the UK, and half the population thinks Boris Johnson is a liar. They shout at him, right? So we asked ourselves the question, what kind of policy analysis might be relevant to understanding governance in an emerging network society? And we assumed, or we actually believed, that there was that the still dominant in many places positivist and technocratic form of policy analysis doesn't fit this network society. It's a bad fit. So that's why we came up with this deliberative policy analysis that rests on these three pillars of interpretation, deliberation, and practice orientation, because we think it's a much better fit with this fast-changing, conflictual, uncertain, dynamic society that we live in. So that's the background to the book and reason we wrote it. And also we think that policy analysts have a very, very different professional role at the moment. And you're not just an advisor that sells ideas to policy elites. We have many different roles. So we are mediators. We assist policy actors in overcoming their conflicts. We help them to articulate their views. Sometimes, the weaker parties need help to step forward and articulate their views. Citizens, for example. We help to develop and to also implement collaborative action. Very important that we can do those things. So we are knowledge broker, change. They really, really care about democracy. And in fact, I think everywhere. I do a lot of work with my Chinese PhD students, and I'm surprised, no longer surprised, but to see how deeply many Chinese people care about democracy, particularly at the local level. We don't understand that in the West, but we did careful research. So the role of the policy analyst has changed, and it is not always reflected, I think, and there's no critique on the curriculum here, in the curricula of the policy schools. So back to the prostitution case. I will go back to it every now and then. That's the book we wrote. So how did that work out? Well, we were very careful to design it as a deliberative policy study. So I worked with the 4 big cities in the Netherlands. It's Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, and Utrecht. And for a year, we did nothing else but meet every 2 months and talk about and design a policy proposal. The research questions, the studies design, the kind of data we wanted to collect. And they had full say in it. So most of the questions reflected their needs. And sometimes I said, well, I understand you want to know this, but it's probably hard to research, and I suggested a reformulation. And they listened to what I had to say as a professional researcher. So that worked out very fine. And after a year, we had a good proposal, and we got the money. They paid into it, and some other agencies. And we started it. It was very much, well, it was actually a mixed methods design with a focus on interpretation. So first thing we did was find out about numbers, because the numbers were all over the place. Someone said, some of the more conservative trafficking people said there are 8,000 sex workers in Amsterdam. Well, a little joke that if we thought that's impossible. Amsterdam is a small city, 800,000 people. And so we thought, how many visits do you need for 8,000 sex workers to make a living? And we calculated that each able-bodied man in Amsterdam has to visit the sex workers at least 7.5 times a year for them to make. So that's nonsense, obviously. That's just silly nonsense. So we did a careful estimation. We thought 500 is a much better number. But that already brought us immediately into conflict with our cities, because they didn't want to believe this. And then we did our own calculating. We sat on a street corner in a bar, and we counted the number of women behind windows, because we have a lot of window prostitution. And we saw you couldn't count it. One day the window was full the whole day. The next day there was nobody. So there's a lot of mobility. That's what we figured out. All right. We kept deliberating with the cities, because every 3 months we met, and then we discussed the progress of the study, the results, and we wrote a little report every 3 months. And they could comment on it, and they did. They were sometimes extremely critical, but then we tried to work it out. And there was also a person from the biggest funder that was sort of operated as a mediator there. We very much focused on the practice of city administration, so it was their problems, their needs, and also local law enforcement. So we did all the right thing, I think, but it was not a success. I'll tell you why later. But at least this is a bit like a Netflix series. There's a cliffhanger at every... You want to translate this?
เหตุผลหนึ่งที่เราอาจจะต้องนึกถึงเครื่องมือหรือว่าวิธีการในการศึกษานโยบายสาธารณะในลักษณะนี้ก็คือสังคมมันเปลี่ยนเป็นสังคมเครือข่ายนะครับที่มีตัวแสดงหลากหลายมากขึ้นนะครับเกินที่จะให้ตัวแสดงใดตัวแสดงหนึ่งเนี่ยรับมือปัญหาเพียงลำพังครับและเทคนิคในการวิเคราะห์เนี่ยจริงๆไม่ใช่ว่าไม่มีประโยชน์นะครับเพียงแต่ว่าเทคนิคเหล่านั้นเนี่ยมันจะให้ข้อมูลในส่วนหนึ่งเช่นให้ตัวเลขสำคัญแต่ว่าในระบบนโยบายที่มันสลับซับซ้อนเนี่ยตัวเลขอย่างเดียวมันไม่พอนะครับมันเป็นที่ต้องเข้ามาอยู่ในกระบวนการในการที่จะตีความชุดความหมายหรือว่าชุดความคิดอื่นๆนะครับหรือว่ามุมมองหรือว่าความคาดหวังที่แตกต่างหลากหลายหรือว่าชุดคุณค่าที่แตกหลากหลายที่มันนอกเหนือจากตัวเลขนะด้วยนะครับเพราะฉะนั้นวิธีการในลักษณะแบบนี้เนี่ยนะครับจึงชวนให้เราได้นึกว่าสังคมสมัยใหม่นะครับสังคมเครือข่ายเนี่ยกับวิธีการแบบเดิมเนี่ยมันอาจจะไม่พออันนี้ไม่ได้มาแทนที่ของเดิมแต่ว่าน่าจะมาช่วยเสริมให้วิธีการเดิมเนี่ยมันทำงานได้ดีขึ้นนะครับแล้วก็กลับมาที่ตัวอย่างเรื่องการจัดระเบียบโสเภณีเนี่ยนะครับซึ่งก็ชัดเจนครับว่าตัวเลขนะครับก็ได้มีความพยายามไปหามานะครับตีความนะครับจากมุมมองที่แตกต่างหลากหลายเนี่ยก็พยายามที่ทำนะครับแต่ว่านโยบายนี้เนี่ยก็เป็นนโยบายที่ไม่ค่อยประสบความสำเร็จนักนะครับซึ่งเฮนริกก็ยังไม่ได้บอกว่าเป็นเพราะอะไรนะครับแต่ว่าตอนท้ายก็ได้พูดเกินไว้นิดนึงนะครับโดยเฉพาะในสไลด์ว่าเป็นเพราะว่าการพูดคุยกันเนี่ยหรือว่าการสร้างการตีความร่วมครับที่มาจากการแลกเปลี่ยนจากภาคส่วนที่หลากหลายที่อยู่ในเครือข่ายในโจทย์นี้เนี่ยมันยังไม่เกิดนั่นเองนะครับ
So is this useful, the translation? Yeah, I can also go on longer. It's up, yeah. Okay. Shall we do it like this? Continue like this? Okay. All right, so in general, this is very brief. The book was very successful. It was sort of an academic bestseller, which doesn't mean you get rich, but, but you get invited. But Yali made a good point, actually, when I met him for the first time about 3 years ago. He said, yeah, it's a good book, but you never tell people how to do it. So people who are sympathetic to it, they don't know how to do it. And that made me think. So then Ja and I started to work together, and we published 2 special issues. We're in the middle of publishing the second one, which are focused very much on methods. And I wrote a paper on methods and so on. So I'm going to now move on to the current developments in deliberative policy analysis. So I was never quite so happy with that network society part. That was not my part at all. It's a bit of a sociological analysis. I think it's true, but I think that there was something deeper going on. But the deeper part is complexity. So I tell you, these are 4 books that all have to do with complexity that I read and that influenced me a lot. So book by Axelrod and Cohen, Harnessing Complexity, book by Mitchell Waldrop, which reads like a novel about complexity theory. This is a book by 2 colleagues of mine from the States, Margaret Starr, Jenny Love, very recent book, Integrative Governance, which also very much deals with complexity, and Bill Connolly, A World of Becoming, a brilliant sort of philosophy, social theory book on complexity. Now, I think complexity is the human predicament of all policy. What do I mean by that? Human predicament means it's our fate. We can't walk away from it. You can't escape it, right? Whatever you do, you will always deal with complexity. Whatever your ideology, your opinion, your interest, there's no way you can walk away from complexity. Complexity will always overtake you. There's no escaping from complexity. And what that means, what is complexity? I mean, I can now lecture for the rest of the afternoon on complexity, and I won't do it. But very briefly, complexity theory, if you can read it, sees the world as a bundle of open systems. So this is a system, this, right? There are nodes. These are the nodes. But more important are the relationships between the nodes. And the state of the system, the characteristics of the system are determined by the interactions between the nodes. So just a simple example, if I, well, there's now a lid on it, but if I were to turn this bottle around, it would empty out, right? The water is fluid. But the single water molecule, H2O, is not fluid. So fluidity is the outcome of the interaction between H2O molecules. So it's a complex system. And that's what the problem with all complex systems, because the interactions keep going on and on and on, you never can predict them. That's the deep uncertainty that we all face. That's why I call it a human predicament. So traffic in Bangkok is a complex system. Well, we agree on that, right? So there's no way, you only can predict that you get stuck at some point, at certain hours of the day. That's also, by the way, part of a complex system. You have regularities. It's not that it's complete chaos, although Bangkok traffic might be, but for example, the world of the market of sexual services is a complex system. The climate is a hugely complex system. Actually, it's many different systems put together, and that's what we say there. The world is a bundle of open systems, social systems, but also material systems, and they interact in very complex ways themselves. And they move in different timescales. So, for example, the very slow timescale of, let's say, changes in DNA. That's, you know, our DNA is a complex system in itself. Mitochondrial DNA that picks up environmental influences and slowly changes. But we also have rapid changes, like on the stock market or the economic cycles that is much more rapid. Well, let's skip that. And then the question becomes, how can we most effectively and justly govern in a globally interconnected social, economic, and environmental system or set of systems? So that's the question as I ask it now, not what is there a policy analysis that fits the network society? No. Is there a policy analysis that is equal to the complexity of the world that we deal with? That's my core question that I write about at the moment. So can we have a kind of policy analysis that is able to deal with this kind of complexity? That's the new reformulation. I skipped this, I skipped that. And then we came up, so what we did, we compiled those two special issues. They have a paper in it, very good paper on deliberation with the Chiang Mai government, right? Local government. And we saw, did a little, you could say I did a little qualitative research there. So I took those, what is it, about 10, 12 papers. I did grounded inductive analysis, and it turned out there are three methods that people use. The first is designed deliberative platforms. That was the most frequently used method. So people are confronted with a complex problem, they bring the stakeholders together and they deliberate. That's what you did. Yeah. Then some of them, they did something more. They had the focus on the system as a whole. And they tried to enhance the democratic, deliberative quality of that whole policy system. In fact, that's also what you did. You tried not to stick to one platform, but you tried to distribute it through the whole city. And that is, I think, an incredibly important thing to do, because policy systems are larger than just one little platform. And then finally, and I talk about that, there's one or two papers that dealt with institutional change. Not at the level of what individual people do, although there are lots of individual people involved, but they talked about change in laws, in institutions, in regulations, in budgets, in taxes, fiscal arrangements, that kind of institutional change, in new organizations. So those are the three methods. What I'm going to do is I walk through them briefly and then get back to to the prostitution case every now and then. You want to translate this part? Yeah. Okay.
ด้วยความที่สังคมปัจจุบันเนี่ยนะครับมันมีความสลับซับซ้อนแบบหลีกเลี่ยงไม่ได้นะครับเป็นสถานการณ์ที่พวกเราเผชิญโดยที่ไม่สามารถที่จะเดินหนีไปไหนได้นะครับมันเป็นเทิร์นสำคัญของโลกนะครับด้วยเหตุนี้เนี่ยเราจึงจำเป็นต้องนึกถึงวิธีการนะครับในการที่จะจัดการกับโจทย์ทางด้านนโยบายเนี่ยที่แตกต่างออกไปจากวิธีเดิมๆซึ่งอาจจะตอบคำถามของสังคมที่สลับซับซ้อนแบบนี้ไม่ได้แล้วนะครับหรือว่าได้อย่างไม่เพียงพอนะครับซึ่งวิธีการที่ถูกเสนอขึ้นมาเนี่ยก็คือวิธีการที่ต้องมานะครับพูดคุยกันนั่นแหละนะครับเอาตัวแสดงที่เกี่ยวข้องนะครับในเครือข่ายเนี่ยนะครับมานั่งถกประเด็นนโยบายร่วมกันนะครับทั้งตัวของประเด็นปัญหาแล้วก็ตัวของทางออกในเชิงนโยบายนะครับทีนี้จริงๆแล้วเนี่ยถ้าย้อนกลับไปวิธีการในเชิงคุณภาพที่เราคุ้นชินกันอยู่แล้วมันก็จะใกล้เคียงกับการทำโฟกัสกรุ๊ปนั่นแหละนะครับเพียงแต่ว่าโดยเฉพาะสไลด์สุดท้ายที่ค้างไว้นี้นะครับมันคือการทำให้วิธีเชิงคุณภาพแบบเดิมๆที่ใช้อย่างโฟกัสกรุ๊ปเนี่ยมันมีการจัดการที่ดีกว่าเดิมนะครับอย่างเช่นนะครับมีการออกแบบไอ้ตัวของกระบวนการเข้ามานะครับไม่ใช่แค่กระบวนการอย่างเดียวคือแพลตฟอร์มในความหมายอย่างใหญ่ก็คือตัวเวทีด้วยนะครับในการที่คุยกันไม่ใช่แค่โต๊ะกลมอย่างที่เราคุ้นกันว่ามานั่งนึกถึงว่าโจทย์แบบนี้นะครับตัวแสดงที่เกี่ยวข้องเยอะขนาดนี้นะครับก็คือผู้มีส่วนได้ส่วนเสียเยอะขนาดนี้เนี่ยเราจะออกแบบยังไงก็คือมีโจทย์เรื่องการออกแบบนะครับแล้วมันไม่ใช่ว่าออกแบบนะครับแพลตฟอร์มให้คนเข้ามานั่งแล้วทุกอย่างมันก็จะออกมานะครับเป็นเข้าใจปัญหาได้ทางออกนะครับแต่ว่ามันจำเป็นที่ต้องนึกถึงการยกระดับคุณภาพของการพูดคุยกันด้วยก็คือมันต้องมีเรื่องของตัวกระบวนการนะครับก็คือนักวิจัยเนี่ยต้องมีความสามารถนะครับในการที่จะต้องเป็นกระบวนการได้ด้วยนะครับเพื่อที่จะทำให้การพูดคุยกันเนี่ยมันมีคุณภาพนะครับและสุดท้ายเนี่ยมันจะต้องไปเชื่อมโยงกับระบบการบริหารจัดการในประเด็นนั้นที่มีอยู่ครับมันจะต้องไปคอนเน็กไม่ใช่คุยกันนะครับแล้วก็เป็นแค่รายงานออกมาแต่ว่าผู้กำหนดนโยบายหรือว่าผู้ที่เกี่ยวข้องในการที่ขับเคลื่อนเรื่องนี้เนี่ยไม่ได้เข้ามาเชื่อมเลยอย่างนั้นมันก็ทำให้งานศึกษาทางด้านนโยบายในเชิงคุณภาพที่อิงการตีความร่วมเนี่ยเข้ามาเกี่ยวข้องเนี่ยมันไปได้ไม่ถึงไหนนะครับเพราะฉะนั้น3องค์ประกอบเนี่ยมันจึงสำคัญมากแล้วเดี๋ยวเฮนริกก็จะอธิบายในรายละเอียดเพิ่มเติม
Let's start with method number 1. And by the way, Jan Lee, who was so critical of me, he sort of believed in this. He is part of the special issues. So design deliberative platforms. They have 4 characteristics that again came out of the papers that we collected. One is they are so you have to imagine there's a big problem and somebody then brings together the stakeholders in a deliberative platform, right? And one of the characteristics, they are very problem-oriented. So that comes out of, and you can forget about that, but it's something that I'm influenced very much, American pragmatism. But it is an important, American pragmatism, and I quote here work of Chris Ansel, is always very, very emphasizes that you need to be problem-oriented if you want to make any progress in your thinking and in your understanding. And Chris Ansel says, problems, so if you get down from your level of abstraction to the real-world problem, problems disrupt existing assumptions and call for fresh discovery. They pin disputes about knowledge, principles, and values down to particulars. And they focus our attention on action and consequences. Now, that doesn't always work out because some people, like I said, are very ideologically predisposed. But normally, it should work out. If you're confronted with very concrete problems, then you need to sometimes, well, you hopefully rethink what you already know about, think you know about the problem, right? So, but problem orientation is an incredibly important focus of these deliberative platforms. And I'm going to skip this because it's a bit, it comes out of my book, it's very dialogical. But I also, this is the second characteristic, deliberation is not just talking. You don't sit in such platforms because you like each other or something. Well, in the end, maybe you may like each other, but it's a joint strategy of inquiry. By talking, deliberating with each other, and deliberation is much more than talking, it's talking under certain conditions, you explore the problem. You try to find out what the nature of the problem is. And John Forrester and his colleagues, they wrote a paper also in this special issue. He says, deliberation has a cognitive dimension, so you learn more about the problem, you learn more about each other, but it also has a relational dimension. You start to relate differently to each other. And that's what the quote is about. So he says we have a quality of creating not just a view of the past, but a lived present in which participants who might not know each other, who might not like each other very much, who differ very much in their opinions, they slowly meet each other. They come to develop a kind of trust in one another. They come to see each other in new ways, with new qualities of respect, appreciation, recognition, and acknowledgement, etc. And these, he says, are deliberative accomplishments. This is what you earn by creating a deliberative platform. And this is how it worked in the beginning in the prostitution study. We had differences of opinion, but by talking with each other for a year, we began to like each other. And I began to see, I learned a lot. I told them, the policymakers, that the officials, I learned a lot from you. And it was true. I wasn't flattering them or anything. And they began to understand how a researcher sees the world, so what you need to do to get good knowledge and to do rigorous research. So this is very much, I think, it's a very important statement. This says, I skip a few things. This basically says that it's even better if you can work together, not just sit down in a room and talk, but work together on a practical task. And that this process is speeded up enormously and gains more depth. This I wasn't aware of, but they all used visual tools. All of them. So it wasn't just talking in a room or doing things together, but you also visualize it. And what is the purpose of those visual tools? Well, it was a way, again, of exploring the nature of the problem, but also the nature of your problems together. I have an example of that brief in the next slide. You would get a perspective on the conflict when participants, and as it always goes, they are sort of immersed in their own assumptions, right? And ascriptions of the other. You think, yeah, that stupid guy, or she doesn't know anything, right? So by using these tools, you begin to see that they begin to question their own ascriptions, their own assumptions. Also, suggestions for solution of those conflicts and problems came out. And also solutions for the bigger problem that they were working on. And, very important, it allowed the weaker parties in the process, which were often citizens, it allowed them a voice. They would have an input. They would be heard. So here are some examples, and don't get hung up on it looks messy, and it doesn't mean much to us. But for example, the one on the top is a timeline that is used to reconstruct how a conflict emerged, what it is about. So, and I'm not going through it, but step by step, the people reconstructed how such a conflict became a conflict and what was involved in that. So, and this is something else, but don't worry about it. But the whole point of these visualizations is you create it together. It's not that some kind of consultant walks in and says, well, here's a picture of the story. No, you make them very painstakingly, deliberatively, together. Very important part of the process. And then finally, all of these groups invited complexity. I was very reluctant to put that into my papers because it's not so clear how they did it. But they didn't walk away from it. That was clear. They didn't say, this is simple. No, they realized the predicament, the human predicament of complexity. And they also thought that what they did before with working with blueprints or a particular model or some kind of linear causation model was totally dysfunctional. It didn't fit the complexity of the problem that they were working on. But how you do it, most of the time it wasn't much more as just being very open to what the problem, how the problem presented itself and how it morphed into a different problem sometimes, or how it transformed itself. But you were not afraid of complexity. It was almost like embracing complexity. And this is actually exactly what these two authors, Axel Roth and Cohen, that was the book on the left, Harnessing Complexity. And they say this, you can't control complexity. It's way too, there's no way you can control it. So, but you can do a couple of things. You can embrace it by harnessing it. That means that you deliberately change the structure of a system in order to increase some measure of performance. And you do so, and this is the important part of that sentence, you do so by exploiting an understanding that the system is complex. So the Dutch, I'm Dutch, I'm from the Netherlands. We are brilliant at that. That's the only thing we're brilliant at. And football. We do that also pretty well. But the Dutch have a big problem at the moment, and that is that the country is below sea level, and with the rising sea levels, we threaten to go under. So what do? I mean, water streams, sea currents, they're a hugely complex system. You can't even begin to understand them. But they know how to harness them. So what the Dutch have done, they started to dump sand, huge amounts of sand, in front of the coast. And then the sea currents, they take up the sand, nobody knows exactly how and how it works, and start a process of sedimentation. So it creates more sand. And suddenly you see islands emerging in front of the coast, sand islands, which over the years then will grow with things. And the sand islands, they become higher and higher, they become a barrier. So nobody builds a dike or anything, you just dump some sand and the currents do the rest. That's harnessing complexity. It's very, very interesting. We call it the sand motor, the sand engine. But in general, there are three strategies to do that in social systems. You increase the variation and the diversity within the system, but you keep some standards. In other words, if you invite, for example, citizens into a designed deliberative platform, you increase the diversity. You get more perspectives. You get more experiences. And by getting more perspectives and experiences, you have a higher chance of finding another solution that you've never thought of as a policymaker. And that's also my experience. I worked a lot with citizen groups, and you have no idea of the creativity in those groups, really. And but you also change the interactions in the system, so it's no longer officials talking to other officials or officials talking up to the minister. No, you talk with a whole broad range and diversity of actors in your system, which is often a much richer form of communication. And you select and disseminate those solutions that work. So lots of things bubble up, you can try them out. I'll come back later when I talk about design. So lots of solutions come up. Not all of them work, clearly not, but some do, and those you keep. That's harnessing complexity. I think it's time for Pierre Pong to translate.
ในแง่ของการออกแบบนะครับเวทีในการพูดคุยหรือว่า แลกเปลี่ยนเรียนรู้นะครับหรือว่าถกเถียงหรือว่าปรึกษาหารือกันเนี่ยนะครับที่ไปไกลกว่าเครื่องมือหรือว่าวิธีการเดิมๆที่เราคุ้นกันก็คือเรื่องโฟกัสกรุ๊ปเนี่ยนะครับการที่จะไปออกแบบเนี่ยมันต้องพิจารณาอยู่4มิติหลักๆนะครับมิติแรกเนี่ยก็คือต้องตั้งต้นจากปัญหานะครับก็คือออกแบบโดยพิจารณาความเฉพาะเจาะจงปัญหาครับก็คือไม่ใช่ว่าทุกๆปัญหาเนี่ยจะใช้วิธีการออกแบบเดียวกันนะครับแต่ละโจทย์มันก็ต้องการเวทีที่แตกต่างรูปแบบกันนะครับอันที่2เนี่ยก็คือต้องมองว่าเราจะจัดเวทีหรือพื้นที่ขึ้นมาเนี่ยเพื่อสร้างความรู้ร่วมกันด้วยนะครับก็คือมองมันเป็นเรื่องของการสร้างความรู้แบบหนึ่งนะครับไม่ว่าจะเป็นความรู้ในปัญหาแล้วก็ความรู้ในทางออกนะครับซึ่งแน่นอนว่าความรู้ที่สร้างขึ้นเนี่ยมันต้องเชื่อมไปสู่ความร่วมมือในวันข้างหน้าด้วยนะครับในการที่จะรับมือกับปัญหาทางนโยบายร่วมกันนะครับอันที่3เนี่ยก็คือพยายามนึกถึงการใช้การวาดการเขียนลงบนกระดาษขนาดใหญ่เนี่ยมาช่วยนะครับแต่ต้องเป็นการวาดร่วมกันนะครับเพื่อที่จะทำให้เกิดข้อห่วงใยร่วมนะครับหรือว่ามุมมองร่วมอะไรบางอย่างออกมาได้จากการพูดคุยนะครับแล้วตรงนี้มันก็จะเป็นเหมือนข้อมูลสำคัญนะครับที่เราได้จากการใช้เครื่องมือแบบนี้นะครับอันที่4ก็คือต้องทดไว้ในใจเสมอว่าไอ้ตัวความสลับซับซ้อนเนี่ยมันดำรงอยู่นะครับมันเป็นสิ่งที่ปฏิเสธไม่ได้หลีกเลี่ยงไม่ได้ทีนี้เราขจัดมันไม่ได้แต่ว่าเราต้องเข้าใจมันนะครับแล้วก็ไปกับมันให้ได้โดยมีแนวทางในการรับมือกับเรื่องของความสลับซับซ้อนอยู่3แนวทางหลักนะครับแนวทางแรกก็คือต้องอย่ารวมศูนย์นะครับรวมศูนย์ในที่นี้ไม่ใช่ระบบขนาดใหญ่นะครับเรานึกถึงวิธีการออกแบบโจทย์วิจัยเฉพาะของเราเนี่ยนะครับอย่างเช่นนะครับมันมีตัวแสดงที่เกี่ยวข้องเต็มไปหมดที่เราจะดึงเข้ามาอยู่ในเวทีเพื่อที่จะพูดคุยหาความหมายร่วมเนี่ยนะครับหรือว่าตีความร่วมเนี่ยนะครับเข้าใจโจทย์ร่วมกันหาทางออกร่วมกันเนี่ยเราอาจจะต้องมีหลายๆเวทีหน่อยมันมีคนเยอะนะฮะก็คือ decentralize ในความหมายที่ว่ามีหลายๆเวทีหน่อยแต่ว่าต้องมีมาตรฐานกลางอะไรบางอย่างนะครับแต่ละเวทีต้องมีมาตรฐานร่วมอะไรบางอย่างนะครับอันที่2ก็คือให้ความสำคัญเป็นพิเศษกับเรื่องของ เรื่องปฏิสัมพันธ์นะครับที่มันจะนำไปสู่เรื่องของความร่วมมือกันได้ด้วยครับเช่นการคิดถึงการจัดกลุ่มนะไม่ใช่เอาคนที่ไม่ชอบกันมาอยู่ในกลุ่มเดียวกันแล้วสุดท้ายก็ทำให้โจทย์เรื่องนี้มันยิ่งไปยากขึ้นอย่างเงี้ยครับก็ต้องจัดกลุ่มโดยที่นึกถึงการคุยกันแล้วจับมือร่วมมือกันได้ด้วยนะครับและอันที่3เนี่ยก็ต้องทำให้มันเห็นว่าพอมีอะไรที่พอจะไปได้เนี่ยก็ต้องรีบนะครับให้มันเห็นรูปธรรมอะไรบางอย่างแล้วก็รีบหยิบเอาตรงนั้นมาเพื่อที่จะดันไปต่อนะครับไม่งั้นคุยกันลอยๆแล้วไม่เห็นรูปธรรมหรือว่าขับเคลื่อนอะไรไม่ได้เลยเนี่ยก็จะทำให้เวทีเนี่ยมันอาจจะล่มไปก็ได้ว่าทำให้คนรู้สึกเบื่อหน่ายที่จะมาร่วมเวทีนะครับเพราะฉะนั้นพอมีโซลูชันอะไรที่พอจะเป็นไปได้เนี่ยก็ต้องรีบในการที่จะทำให้เกิดเป็นรูปธรรมไม่ว่ามันจะมี impact มากหรือน้อยหรือว่ามันจะนำไปสู่การแก้ปัญหาได้มากหรือน้อยก็ตามเนี่ยแต่ว่าถ้าพอมันไปได้เนี่ยต้องรีบหยิบมันออกมาแล้วก็ทำให้มันเวิร์กนะครับ
All right. I'll try to stick to about half an hour for the remainders. Otherwise, you all get tired. I'm going to skip this. All right. I can say with confidence that design deliberative platforms are the most frequently used method in deliberative policy analysis. So if you're stuck, you bring people together and you start to talk with each other. But those platforms have a number of risks, and I'll go with you through the risks. First of all, the famous epistemological vulnerability. So even if a platform comes to certain conclusions or finds certain solutions, then the policymakers higher up, the parliament, for example, or the city council, or the minister, or the mayor, they can say, well, I don't want to hear about this. And this happens all the time. So, and this certainly in a climate of that we have nowadays of fake data and alternative facts and you name it. Also, and this is actually quite a serious issue, those platforms ignore the legal mandate of other policy actors. So city councils are not there for nothing. They've been elected by people. They have a particular task in the system. So if suddenly some kind of platform comes up with totally new ideas, the city council can rightfully say, oh, well, you're not elected, we are elected, right? so we don't listen to you. There's also a lot of strategic use of these deliberative platforms. So they're stimulated by officials only to co-opt political opponents or to delay decisions or overcome veto points, and you know it. And then there's, what I think is a serious issue, is a lack of consolidation. So they don't percolate up into the system. They don't aggregate up to something else. And that's a big, big problem, I think. So what do we do about that? Well, let's first go back to the prostitution case. So we did the same thing. You see some of those risks were playing out in our study, in our deliberative study. First of all, the dialogue that we set up was only between the researchers and some officials from the large cities. And in hindsight, I think we should have invited many more people from the beginning, particularly sex workers. So we had big fights early on about the data. So we said, in a city like Amsterdam, there may be at most 500 sex workers. And you know, they were angry about it. And I said, well, it's based on your own estimates and our counting. No, it must be thousands. But had we had sex workers in our forum, then they could have said, no, it's really about 500. We know our colleagues, right? And but we didn't. It was a big strategic mistake, I think. Well, we were trying it. Huh? We were very problem-oriented. And I think for quite a while, and maybe throughout the whole study, the meetings did work as a kind of form of inquiry and discovery. But the cities didn't want to understand complexity. We pushed it all the time. But they understood some of the difficulties in data. They had an understanding of that you could frame a problem in different ways, interestingly. I never had to argue with that. They said, oh yeah, of course, you can see it this way, you can see it that way. But in the end, it broke down. It broke down. They started to hide behind an ideology of trafficking and anti-prostitution sentiment. And then it collapsed completely in the end because they didn't want the report to be published. And I pushed for it. And then when the Dutch Senate, the upper chamber, heard about the report and they requested it, and I gave it to them, of course, it's public money, right? And so they were furious, particularly when an earlier version of a punitive law was struck down because of our report. So not a great success. I don't know how I could have done, well, I could have done a few things different. I still think it would have broken down, actually. So there is a big problem with inclusive deliberation that I haven't talked about yet. And I'm going to talk about now. And that is the problem of what I call the reductionist fallacy. Let me explain what I mean by that. It has to do with complexity. So think of systems. I told you, right? Complexity is a set of open systems. Think of them as nested. So let's begin with our bodies. In the middle, at the lowest micrological level, is our DNA, right? And that's in itself a complex system. But that complex system is nested in a larger cellular environment with hormones and with electrolytes, streams of electrolytes, and so on. That whole system is nested within the larger organism, the brain, the heart, the liver, the gut environment, and so on. And that organism is nested within the physical and social world. Now, what is the problem here? The problem is that you cannot explain the physical and social world in terms of DNA. Or let me put it differently, you cannot just extrapolate what happens at the DNA level to the physical and social world. You need different, each of those levels has its own properties, has its own characteristics that you have to deal with, that you have to have a theory of or understanding of. Now, let's move here. So the smallest group, it's hard to read, is the small group dialogue. It's the smallest system. That's a deliberative platform. people talking with each other. But that is nested within, I have to read it here because it's so, I'm too close. That is nested within a neighborhood environment and a local economics and a physical infrastructure. And that system is nested within city administration, all sorts of laws and regulations and politics and economics. And that is in itself nested in a national administration. Now, you cannot explain what happens at the national level by just talking about small groups, right? I mean, obviously, there are small groups involved, but you cannot simply extrapolate from the small group to the national level. That's the reductionist fallacy. So you need something more. You need methods that deal with the higher levels, that are able to deal with the higher levels. Is that clear? Because I think it's a very important insight that is overlooked, I think, often in this type of work. So, well, here it says it in a more formal way, but I explained that already. One way to do it is to enhance the deliberative capacity of a whole policy system. So what you try to do is when you create a deeper form of democratic deliberation in a small system, you try to do that in the whole system. So more and more actors in the system begin to deliberate with each other, or to talk in deliberative ways. And there are three analytical dimensions: social, institutional, and participatory. And I wrote them down for you. Social capacity, so it's all about the deliberative capacity of the whole policy system. So the social capacity is that you distribute the discourse power throughout the whole system. So, for example, citizens can talk about, in a deliberative way, citizens can talk with officials, officials can talk with other officials, with NGOs, and so on and so on. So the point being that if enough people start to talk in a deliberative way with each other, it becomes a much more, well, diverse system. You deal with complexity better, but also a more democratic system. You also have to then lift that up to the level of institutions so that it becomes normal for officials to do this. And that is, for example, happening now in Amsterdam. So the alderman, the highest official under the mayor, very powerful people, they say to the civil servants, I don't want to hear about your reports anymore. First you go out and talk to people. So you create an institutional change this way. And then there is participatory capacity. Is there room within the system for participation? And do you promote that? Does it become normalized? Does it become institutionalized again? So those are the three types of capacity. And you want to, yeah?
อาจจะตามไม่ค่อยทันเหมือนกันนะครับแต่ความรู้ที่เราร่วมกันสร้างเนี่ยมันต้องเป็นความรู้ที่ปฏิบัติได้ด้วยนะครับไม่ใช่ความรู้ที่ล่องลอยการที่เรามานั่งใช้วิธีแบบนี้แล้วสุดท้ายจบลงด้วยความล่องลอยเนี่ยก็มีปัญหาเหมือนกันนะครับในขณะเดียวกันเนี่ยต้องคุยกันเนี่ยนะครับต้องพิจารณาว่ามันต้องไปกับระเบียบนะครับแล้วก็อำนาจหน้าที่ของฝ่ายต่างๆที่เกี่ยวข้องด้วยนะครับอย่าคุยกันในลักษณะที่เต็มไปด้วยความคาดหวังที่ไม่ได้เชื่อมโยงกับข้อจำกัดต่างๆในเชิงสถาบันนะครับแล้วก็ต้องมียุทธศาสตร์นะครับในการพูดคุยก็คือต้องดึงเอาผู้ที่เกี่ยวข้องจริงๆเนี่ยเข้ามาอยู่ในวงเพื่อให้สามารถที่เชื่อมไปสู่การตัดสินใจของฝ่ายนโยบายที่เกี่ยวข้องได้นะครับอันนี้ก็จะเป็นประเด็นที่ค้างไว้ก่อนหน้านี้ครับทีนี้เฮนริกก็พูดเรื่องการพูดคุยที่นับรวมทุกฝ่ายนะครับว่ามีความสำคัญมากนะครับโดยต้องละที่จะคิดแบบเป็นเส้นตรงนะครับแล้วก็ละที่จะคิดแบบแยกส่วนนะครับอันนี้สำคัญมากก็คือกระบวนการในการปรึกษาหารือหรือว่าการพูดคุยกันในฐานะที่เป็นเครื่องมือหรือว่าเป็นวิธีการในเชิงคุณภาพนะครับในการคิดเรื่องนโยบายเนี่ยมันก็นะครับมีลักษณะที่ซับซ้อนในตัวมันเองนะครับจะไปคิดแบบเส้นตรงหรือว่าไปคิดแบบแยกส่วนไม่ได้นะครับทีนี้ขยับจากเรื่องของการออกแบบเวทีพูดคุยนะครับประการที่2เนี่ยก็คือเรื่องของการยกระดับนะฮะศักยภาพในการพูดคุยนะครับซึ่งการยกระดับศักยภาพในการพูดคุยเนี่ยนะครับก่อนที่จะมาถึงสไลด์นี้เนี่ยมันมีประเด็นสำคัญก็คือมันจะต้องนึกถึงอยู่ เรื่องใหญ่ๆนะครับอันแรกก็คือจะต้องเป็นการจัดเวทีที่ไม่บังคับนะครับทุกคนต้องมาโดยไม่ได้ถูกบังคับให้มานะครับก็คือเป็นออเทนติกนั่นเองนะครับอันที่สองเนี่ยก็คือต้องอินคลูซีฟในความหมายว่านับรวมตัวแทนเสียงที่หลากหลายนะครับอาจจะไม่ใช่เป็นตัวแทนของทุกๆฝ่ายนะครับทั้งหมดสักทีเดียวนะฮะบางทีมันอาจจะมีหลายฝ่ายเต็มไปหมดเลยแต่ว่าเราเน้นตัวแทนของมุมมองที่แตกต่างหลากหลายให้ครบนะครับไม่ใช่ตัวแทนที่ครบทุกกลุ่มแต่ว่าเป็นมุมมองที่ครอบคลุมทุกมิติมากกว่านะครับและสุดท้ายก็คือไม่ใช่ว่าคุยกันแล้วไม่มีผลต่อการตัดสินใจเลยอย่างเงี้ยครับคือคนมาคุยเนี่ยเขาก็จะไม่อยากมาเพราะฉะนั้นการใช้วิธีแบบนี้เราต้องเน้นให้เห็นความเป็นไปได้ว่าคุยเสร็จเนี่ยมันจะนำไปสู่นะครับผลอะไรบางประการครับอย่างน้อยที่สุดก็มีข้อสรุปร่วมกันของพวกเราเนี่ยในการยื่นต่อไปให้ผู้มีอำนาจที่จะต้องตัดสินใจต่อไปได้พิจารณาต่ออะไรเงี้ยนะครับแล้วก็กลับมาที่ตรงนี้ครับว่าไอ้เรื่องของศักยภาพเนี่ยมันต้องดู3มิติคู่ขนานกันไปนะครับมิติแรกก็คือตัวภาคสังคมเองนี่แหละก็คือผู้ที่เกี่ยวข้องต่างๆเนี่ยครับก็จะต้องมีศักยภาพเพียงพอที่จะเข้ามาอยู่ในเวทีโดยที่ไม่ได้รู้สึกว่าตัวเองมาแล้วก็ไม่มีความมั่นใจนะครับเราก็คือต้องนึกถึงการสร้างบรรยากาศให้คนเข้ามาแล้วมีความมั่นใจนะครับอันที่สองเนี่ยในเงื่อนไขในเชิงสถาบันเองเนี่ยนะครับก็คือการที่ภาครัฐเนี่ยนะครับที่จะต้องเข้ามาเกี่ยวข้องเนี่ยนะฮะก็ควรที่จะมีความชัดเจนว่านะครับมีกลไกที่เปิดให้การพูดคุยตรงนี้นะครับนำไปสู่การเปลี่ยนแปลงในเชิงนโยบายหรือว่ามีอิทธิพลทางนโยบายได้นะครับหรือว่ามีช่องทางในการที่จะทำให้เสียงตรงนี้นำไปสู่การกำหนดนโยบายหรือการนำนโยบายไปปฏิบัติได้ด้วยนะครับอันสุดท้ายก็คือเรื่องของศักยภาพในการมีส่วนร่วมในความหมายที่ว่ามันไม่ใช่แค่ว่าสังคมมีความพร้อมนะครับแล้วก็สถาบันเนี่ยก็มีเปิดรับให้คนเข้ามาแต่ว่าการอำนวยความสะดวกนะครับการเป็นตัวกลางนะครับการประสานให้เกิดการพูดคุยที่เสียงที่หลากหลายเนี่ยได้ถูกนับรวมเข้ามาอย่างเสมอภาคกันเนี่ยมันก็เป็นอีกศักยภาพหนึ่งที่ต้องพัฒนาขึ้นมานะครับเพื่อการันตีว่าเสียงที่เกี่ยวข้องเนี่ยนะครับจะถูกนับรวมทั้งหมดนะครับ
Well, I have an extended example, but I'm not going to bother you too much with that. It comes out of, it's an attempt, it's also in the special issue if you want to read about it, to enhance the deliberative capacity of the whole nature conservation system in Colombia. It's a very, very interesting story. And actually, the paper that Pia Pong and Bob Soek wrote is also a very, very interesting attempt to enhance the deliberative capacity of the planning system in Chiang Mai. So there are really interesting things happening in this field. And what it does, and that's what this particular paper showed, is that you kickstart a process of learning, collective learning in the system. And that's, of course, what you want to have. You learn from each other. And I'm not going into this now. This also comes, interestingly, out of pragmatism, evolutionary learning. But I'm going to introduce something else now, and that's my final part. And that is a rethinking of design thinking. So, because even if you can and succeed in enhancing the deliberative capacity of a system, you still are not dealing very well with institutional elements of policy system, as I said, or like organizations and laws and professional roles, budgets, those kinds of things, which have an enormous influence. So bear with me, I'm going to throw a few things at you and then wrap it up. So what you see in the moment, and this is sort of the newest ideas about design, institutional design, is something called design in practice. And so it's no longer that officials sit in their offices and then sketch a new law or something, or write up a new budget, but they do it together with other people. And they do it in an iterative way, so realizing that the world is really too complicated to do this from behind your desk. So that's, and for example, at King's College, they call this the policy lab, and have applied it to all sorts of things. The latest report I wrote was a policy lab about removing landmines in zones of conflict after the conflict. Was a huge problem. And bringing in the people who live in those zones and then design systems to deal with that. I'm going to, and why is this important? Because, and I haven't talked about this, I kept this to the end, complexity has another important characteristic, and that's interconnectedness. So we all know about that, right? So if you change something here in the system, it has all sorts of effects at the other end. The butterfly effect, you might have heard of that. But also in policy, it has often very negative effects. You must have heard of the term negative unintended consequences. Well, that's the result of interconnectedness. So you change something in the system, you don't know really how the system operates, how it is put together, and something changes in a whole different part of the system that expresses itself as a negative unintended consequence. So how do you deal with interconnectedness? Clearly, you cannot deal with it by making comprehensive policy, because that's too complicated. It doesn't work. We have done it in the past, and it doesn't work. It's like these models of the economy where you put in 50 variables, and you have supercomputers running the models, and they still can't predict the next economic crisis. So, because they forgot to put in money, which is a very important variable in economics. It's not a variable in the model. Now it is probably, but it wasn't in 2007. So, and you always forget something. You cannot have a comprehensive overview of complex systems. Simply doesn't work. So what do? Well, I wrote a paper, that's the one on the bottom, together with my colleague Florian Wenninger, about Red Vienna. Now, very briefly, Red Vienna was a 15-year period between 1919 and 1934. A socialist government in Vienna had a majority there and created something which is seen now by historians as probably the most innovative and the most successful municipal policy ever, anywhere. And the effects, particularly in housing, that the public housing system that this administration created, we still have in place a century later. So this is something remarkable, but not just housing, it was actually a broadband policy that included healthcare, education, public health, youth services, maternity services, libraries, swimming pools, you name it. It was all in there. So this was clearly a case of integrated governance. And it was not done through design in practice in the sense that they deliberated with everybody. This was 1919, right? 1920. But it was a case of design in practice that they started out with small examples, see if it worked, and then moved on. And it was all held together by a utopian vision. And some historians call it Marxism, but it absolutely was not. It wasn't Marxism. It was a kind of humanitarian vision to elevate the working class. And what you saw, what they did, is they worked at the level of institutions. So they didn't sit down in deliberative platforms, but they immediately went to how can we create a system that actually produces the housing, right? So the government built the housing itself. They hired architects, young architects who were willing to work for this government. And it has three elements of what I call emergent institutional design. One was a very, very pragmatist conception of institutions. So think of institutions as very big, stable, rigid structures, right? Well, they're not. Institutions are actually things that we make ourselves. So if you think of them in those ways, then they become a bundle of practices, of values, and you can then change it. And we call this scaffolding, following Chris and Sal again. So scaffolding means is a form of design in practice. You create, this is what I called, remember when I said increase the diversity in a group? Well, they did that, and they came up with all sorts of creative solutions and tried them out. And some worked and some didn't. So the first thing they did, for example, was put in place a distribution system. There were empty apartments in Vienna. Vienna had a huge housing crisis in 1919. This was right after the First World War. And they started, well, why don't we redistribute the housing? And that worked to some extent, but only to some extent. You still had hundreds of thousands of people in precarious housing. So clearly that didn't work properly. And then gradually they stumbled upon the possibility of building their own housing. So the city government became a construction company. They had the land, so they built on that. They had bought up land after the war. Land was very cheap, so they had lots of land. They used it. So that was one, a pragmatist conception of institutions. The second was the crucial role of a vision. So everything they did was guided by this vision, this humanitarian vision of elevating the working classes. And actually that had the effect that it drew in people who were not Marxists but had a lot to offer. So the Minister of Finance of Vienna in those days was an ex-banker who had very progressive ideas and was pretty much disgusted with his banker's class and went to work for the government. And he brought all his finance understanding to bear upon government. The health alderman or minister, they called him in those days, was also a bourgeois person, and he created all these fantastic hospitals, youth hospitals, maternity services, public health systems, etc., that are also still in place. So, but you need that vision to hold everything together, to keep it on the rails. And finally, scaffolding. I already mentioned this. So you create small successes, and you build upon your small successes. But then you also you bring it downwards. Once you have something in place, like a public housing system that you create yourself, then you use that to create, for example, libraries on the premises so that the workers could educate themselves. So those are the three elements of emergent institutional design. And I put in this picture because you see all the elements of that policy. It was a wonderful example, a historical example of integrative governance. Let me see, I think I'm almost done. Yeah. You want to translate this part first and then I wrap it up? Yeah, just a few more minutes.
ในกระบวนการแบบนี้เนี่ยนะครับมันมีเรื่องของการเรียนรู้ไปด้วยกันเนี่ยสำคัญมากนะครับโดยการเรียนรู้ที่ว่าต้องเป็น evolutional learning ในความหมายที่ว่าเรียนรู้ไปเรื่อยๆนะครับค่อยๆเรียนรู้จากการมีข้อสรุปอะไรร่วมกันบางอย่างนะครับหรือว่าเข้าใจจากเวทีคุยกันนะครับมีประเด็นอะไรเนี่ยก็ค่อยๆเก็บไปเรื่อยๆอะไรเงี้ยครับสะสมเรียนรู้แบบทับไปเรื่อยๆแบบนี้นะครับแล้วก็วิธีแบบนี้ก็คือไม่ใช่การวิ่งตรงไปที่การหาทางออกเลยนะครับแต่มันคือการให้ความสำคัญกับเรื่องของกระบวนการเรียนรู้ด้วยนะครับอีกอันนึงที่น่าสนใจมากก็คือกระบวนการในการคิดแบบนี้เนี่ยมันจะต้องเน้นการคิดเชิงออกแบบนะครับแต่ว่าไม่ใช่คิดแล้วก็ออกแบบแล้วก็ค่อยไปคิดว่าตอนท้ายเนี่ยจะไปทำแต่มันคือในลักษณะที่คิดไปแล้วก็ลองทำไปนะครับที่เรียกว่า design practice เนี่ยนะครับซึ่งก็จะเป็นพื้นฐานสำคัญของการคิดเรื่อง policy นะฮะซึ่งก็ไม่ใช่มีแค่ที่สหราชอาณาจักรนะครับอย่างที่สิงคโปร์ก็เริ่มมีอะไรแบบนี้ครับก็คือเราคิดแล้วลองเอามาทำเองนะครับกระบวนการแบบนี้พอคุยกันเสร็จปุ๊บแล้วก็ลองเอามาทำดูแล้วก็กลับไปถอดบทเรียนกันใหม่มันจึงมีลักษณะที่เป็นการที่ต้องเรียนรู้ไปด้วยกันตลอดนะครับจัดการไปด้วยกันลองผิดลองถูกไปด้วยกันถอดบทเรียนไปด้วยกันเรื่อยๆนะครับให้ความสำคัญกับ ongoing interaction นะครับก็คือคำว่าเชิงคุณภาพในที่นี้มันจึงเป็นคุณภาพไม่ใช่แค่เ เรื่องของตัวคุณภาพของนโยบายแต่มันคือคุณภาพของปฏิสัมพันธ์นะครับหรือว่าความสัมพันธ์ของตัวแสดงต่างๆที่อยู่ในกระบวนการนโยบายอันนี้ด้วยนะครับเพราะนั้นอันนี้จึงสำคัญนะครับสุดท้ายเนี่ยเฮนริกก็ได้พูดถึงนะฮะอีกเคสหนึ่งนะครับก็คือเคสเรื่องของการแก้ปัญหาที่อยู่อาศัยที่เวียนนานะครับที่ออสเตรียนะครับที่ชื่อโครงการว่าเรดเวียนนานะครับซึ่งโครงการนี้ก็สะท้อนให้เห็นว่ามันประสบความสำเร็จได้นะครับก็คือโครงการเรื่อง housing เนี่ยด้วยการที่มันมีการเรียนรู้ร่วมกันนะครับแล้วก็ลองผิดลองถูกไปด้วยกันถอดบทเรียนไปด้วยกันนะครับอันไหนที่ทำไปแล้วไม่เวิร์กก็คุยกันแล้วก็ไปทำอย่างอื่นอะไรอย่างเงี้ยครับก็คือมันไม่ได้ใช้วิธีการในการวิเคราะห์ในลักษณะที่สำเร็จรูปแล้วก็นึกถึงผลอย่างเดียวแต่มันนึกถึงเรื่องของการเรียนรู้ด้วยแล้วก็ทำให้โครงการนี้ประสบความสำเร็จแล้วก็เป็นที่ยอมรับทั่วโลกจากการที่มันลองผิดลองถูกทำไปเรื่อยๆจนมันแก้ปัญหาได้จริงๆนะครับฐานสำคัญของการคิดเรื่องพวกนี้เนี่ยมันจึงหนีไม่พ้นนะครับ3ประเด็นสำคัญที่ทิ้งท้ายไว้ก็คือเรื่องของการที่มันจะต้อง pragmatism ในความหมายที่ว่ามันต้องปฏิบัติได้จริงอ่ะไม่ว่าจะทำอะไรก็ตามคุยกันเนี่ยห้ามคุยลอยๆแต่คุยแล้วเนี่ยสามารถที่จะนำไปสู่ข้อเสนอที่เป็นรูปธรรมแก้ปัญหาอะไรบางอย่างลองผิดลองถูกได้นะครับอันที่สองก็คือการคิดไปทำไปนี่แหละนะครับไม่ใช่ว่าคิดว่ามันจะต้องเพอร์เฟกต์นะครับแต่ว่าคิดว่ามันคือการเรียนรู้นะครับและอันสุดท้ายเนี่ยก็คือเหมือนนะครับในการที่จะแก้ปัญหาอะไรก็ตามเนี่ยscaffolding เนี่ยมันก็แปลตรงๆก็คือเหมือนนั่งร้านนะครับนั่งร้านที่เวลาเราก่อสร้างตึกครับเราจะต้องมีนั่งร้านก่อนแล้วมันก็โยกขึ้นโยกลงได้นะครับพอไปซ่อมข้างบนข้างล่างยังไม่เสร็จก็เลื่อนขึ้นเลื่อนลงได้ก็คือมันสะท้อนถึงความยืดหยุ่นนะครับสะท้อนถึงการเหมือนเราสร้างตึกครับการแก้ปัญหาสักอย่างหนึ่งเนี่ยก็เหมือนสร้างตึกหรือซ่อมตึกเนี่ยที่เราจะต้องทำตัวเป็นนั่งร้านที่ดีนะครับที่ยืดหยุ่นโยกซ้ายโยกขวาก็ได้ขึ้นลงก็ได้อะไรเงี้ยครับเพื่อที่จะซ่อมเรื่อยๆสร้างไปเรื่อยๆอันไหนที่นะครับมันไม่ได้หมายความว่ามันต้องเสร็จเป็นชั้นนะครับบางทีวันนี้ทำอันนี้แล้วกันอย่างเงี้ยครับมันก็จะเป็นกระบวนการในลักษณะแบบนั้นนะครับ
Alright. Final part. So back to the prostitution case. Again, I try to understand what happened because in the end, I think it ended in conflict, which it shouldn't have. But I think, in hindsight again, we put too much emphasis on the research and not enough on the intervention. So that made us vulnerable to this epistemic vulnerability. We should have worked towards changing the system right from the start, and we didn't do that. We thought, okay, we do the good research in which they are involved, like a kind of action research. It will help us. It didn't in the end. It was, as already said, the whole deliberative design was not inclusive enough. We couldn't have made it more inclusive in the structures in which we worked, by the way. But we should have included sex workers and police officers and professionals and NGOs and even brothel owners, I think. We certainly did not enhance the deliberative quality of the whole system. In fact, during the research, a parallel system of ideological discourse and disinformation became apparent to us. So the cities kept information from us, and they began to believe more and more in this trafficking discourse, which we were very puzzled about because to us they spoke a different language. They were disingenuous. And there was no joint design in practice of different institutions. In fact, they were very proud that they had created what they called chain management, which was an enforcement system that included different elements of the whole municipal apparatus. So that they engaged in their own design in practice, but it was not aimed at making better and more humane policies. In fact, it was aimed at enforcement and punitive policies. But there was some consolidation, in fact. As I said, the study was used by the Dutch Senate to defeat an earlier punitive version of the law, and I became involved in creating the sex worker advocacy group Proud. I didn't create it. I mean, the women created it, but I was happy to advise them, and I still sometimes throw in a word of wisdom, I hope, to help them. That was it. So thank you for your attention. Very happy to have been able to talk here, and hope you found it useful.
สุดท้ายเฮนริกก็สรุปกลับไปที่การศึกษาวิจัยเรื่องการจัดระเบียบการค้าบริการนะครับที่เนเธอร์แลนด์นะครับโดยสรุปถอดบทเรียนให้เห็นว่าที่งานวิจัยตัวเองเนี่ยมันไปไม่สุดเนี่ยนะครับด้วยเหตุที่ว่าหนึ่งเลยเนี่ยมันเป็นงานวิจัยเชิงนโยบายแต่ว่ามันเน้นไปที่วิจัยแต่ว่าไม่ได้เน้นไปที่แอคชั่นอย่างเท่าที่ควรนะครับเพราะฉะนั้นการวิจัยเชิงนโยบายเนี่ยมันก็ช่วยให้เราคิดว่ามันจะต้องเป็นแอคชั่นรีเสิร์ชในตัวมันเองนะครับอันที่สองเนี่ยก็คือเฮนริกก็ยอมรับสารภาพว่าที่ทำโครงการนี้ไม่ประสบความสำเร็จเท่าที่ควรเนี่ยส่วนหนึ่งเป็นเพราะว่ามันยังอินคลูซีฟมันยังนับรวมไม่พอนะครับยังขาดผู้ค้าบริการตำรวจนะครับแล้วก็ตัวแทนของสถานบริการเนี่ยที่จะเข้ามาอยู่ในแพลตฟอร์มนั้นด้วยนะครับอันที่สามก็คือคุณภาพการพูดคุยเนี่ยอาจจะยังไม่ได้ดีพอนะครับอาจจะหลายคนมาก็อาจจะไม่ได้พูดคุยอย่างเต็มที่ทำให้มันนำไปสู่ข้อจำกัดในการที่จะทำให้นโยบายเรื่องโสเภณีเนี่ยนะครับมันเป็นนโยบายที่ดีกว่านี้นะครับอันสุดท้ายก็คือที่เฮนริกได้พูดเกริ่นไปก่อนหน้านี้ว่าเป็นองค์ประกอบสำคัญก็คือเรื่อง design in practice เนี่ยนะครับก็คือมันไม่มีพื้นที่สำหรับลองผิดลองถูกนะครับมันไม่ได้มีการทำให้เป็น policy lab อะไรเรื่องเป็นราวที่จะลองใช้ดูก่อนนะครับมันออกมาเป็นกฎหมายเลยอย่างเงี้ยครับมันก็ขาวกับดำไปเลยไม่มีพื้นที่ให้ได้ลองผิดลองถูกทำกันไปปรับเปลี่ยนกันไปหรือว่าไม่มีพื้นที่สำหรับการเรียนรู้นั่นเองนะครับแต่ยังไงก็ตามนโยบายนี้ก็มีข้อดีอยู่บ้างนะครับตรงที่อย่างน้อยที่สุดก็มีตัวแทนนะครับที่พูดแทนนะครับผู้ที่เป็นกลุ่มเปราะบางนะครับรวมไปถึงได้การตั้ง association อะไรขึ้นมานะครับก็จะมีประเด็นหลักๆประมาณเท่านี้นะครับ
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Hendrik, for this very great public lecture, and maybe thank you so much for this very useful translation by Assistant Professor Dr. Biyapong as well. So maybe give them a big round of applause again. And now we come to the session, maybe the time for Q&A. Anyone have any questions for Professor Hendrik? Yes, please.
Could we say that at the beginning, very beginning, we need to take time and to understand the complexity, and within that is our actors and the linkages as much as possible, right? But it's quite possible that we cannot understand all, so we need to learn along the way.
That's why I brought in, first of all, I keep emphasizing the deliberative nature of it all, right? Because we cannot understand it all, we don't have a comprehensive overview, and that's your point, right? We can only rely on each other. We all have limited perspectives, but if we bring all those limited perspectives together, then we can hope to understand it a little bit better. Also, we can hope to understand that all the dynamic change that's constantly going on. And that's also the point of this design in practice. So we're far removed. In fact, that's the bigger storyline here, right? Policy analysis has moved on really, and not everybody understands it, but it really has moved on from the world where we drew up big blueprints, or we did decision analysis, or even cost-benefit analysis, because that is too static. It suggests that we have good models with which we can understand the world that gives us a little bit of certainty, but it's a fake certainty. It's an illusion. So just by deliberating, by trying to make the whole policy system more deliberative, all those capacities. And in the end, by design in practice, we try to overcome our limited perspectives. That's the whole point of it. And then still it will be incomplete, and it will be, but at least we can hope it's a little better. In fact, although I would say our project, because I had collaborators, might have failed as a deliberative policy analysis project, the book is quoted widely. So people think there's a lot of wisdom in there. Right? So we figured out a lot of things that are still useful, seen as useful by policymakers. So, but not often by the official policymakers, but more by the sex worker advocates and the NGOs. So yes, your point is a very good one. We can never ever, and that's the other human predicament, we can never ever hope to get a comprehensive overview of a system. So if anybody tries to sell you that, that's snake oil, we say. So, but we can only work with these instruments that I gave you, these methods, to at least overcome it a little bit. But thank you. Good point. Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. At the end, the government lift off the prostitute law, right?
Sorry?
At the end,
Yeah?
the government decided to lift off the prostitute law, right?
Yeah.
So that's a success, I think.
Well,
even though you think that the whole thing might...
That was a few years ago.
Yeah.
And now the whole government has moved to this kind of trafficking discourse. And they bring in this new law, which is really a terrible law. And we know that it doesn't work. So registration is a very bad instrument. That was actually also in our book. Because Vienna, we compared all in the Netherlands and Austria. And Vienna did registration for a long time. And even the police in Vienna said, we never use that because it doesn't work. So then why would we introduce it? Right? It's just stupid. Excuse my language. I shouldn't say that.
I have a question. Thanks for sharing. I think the model of design thinking is being used a lot in organizations, and I think incorporating the institution really helps us to see how, in terms of government, actually adopt design in practice. Would you have any example of how government in Asia have actually implement design in practices? Because in some governments we see they are very strict in going out to actually ask people. Most of the time is top-down approach rather than bottom-up approach. Could you share any thoughts?
I don't have examples in Asia. I don't even have many examples in my part of the world, in the West. You're perfectly right that, let me start differently. When I was trained at MIT as a policy scholar, I worked with Don Schoen and Martin Ryan, and they wrote a book about policy design. And they said, well, you can see a lot of design in small scale things, but it becomes already much more complicated when the design is more collective. I think that's still the case. I don't think we made much progress since the days that Don Schoen and Martin Ryan wrote, what's it called, policy framing or something. So, and they have a big, very, very good section on design rationality and design conversations. But I think it becomes more, people become more interested in it. And in that sense I'm very hopeful. But this kind of design, this kind of emergent design, design in practice, that, well, I told you about the policy labs at King's College. Those are examples that you don't see much in other places. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, and I might not know about it, but it's not common thinking. It's much more what you call the top-down approach, still, in most governments. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about the qualitative side of aspects of the policy making. So I was just wondering if there's any quantitative aspect that you have experienced before in the kind of deliberation process and maybe stakeholder engagement kind of perspective.
Very good point. Happy you're asking this. You will have noticed that I've kept calling what I'm doing analysis, right? Deliberative policy analysis. So many of my colleagues have moved away from that term. They talk about critical policy studies or something. There's a journal of that name. I don't buy into that. So no matter how deliberative things become, I still think we need an analytic part. And the analytic part can be either quantitative studies of the problem or qualitative studies of the problem, or interpretive. So what we did in our prostitution study was everything. I call it, give it a nice name, mixed methods, but we basically threw the whole kitchen sink at it. And so we started with the numbers. We started counting. How many sex workers? You don't even know what a sex worker is, by the way, because we suddenly then came to the phenomenon that there were quite a number of students, we never know how many, who provided sexual services on the site. Is that a sex worker? Probably not, right? I don't know. Then we started to count trafficking. Turned out to be impossible because there's no agreed upon definition of trafficking. So our conclusion was no numbers. You can't, simply don't know. The mobility is too high, the definitions are too vague. Then we did qualitative work. We interviewed migrant sex workers. It's a very much a migrant type of profession. So we had 150 sex workers from the countries where the migrants came from, Romania, Bulgaria, most of the Eastern European countries in Europe. And I trained sex workers and ex-sex workers to interview them, because then you get much better interviews. So that's the qualitative part. And what we did, we showed that the trafficking, this paradigm was all wrong. That these women are not trafficked, they're migrants in search of a better life. And well, look at the book and you can see the whole story there. And we did discourse analysis, another interpretive method. So we analyzed how the discourse on prostitution in the Netherlands had changed over a period of 15 years by looking at newspapers, and we did real, methodologically sound critical discourse analysis. So all those things we did, in addition to sitting down with municipalities and talking with them. So I hope this answers your question, that I think there's a very important place in all this deliberation for good, sound research, quantitative and qualitative. Because the quantitative stories don't tell you the whole story, the qualitative story don't tell you the whole story. You need to combine them. Depending on your question, obviously, it always depends on the research question, the analytical question you're asking. But that's why I keep calling it analysis and not studies or something else. Because we need to have this base of knowledge, of inquiry, to help our understanding. Is that an answer to your question? Okay, thank you. Thanks. Yes, I love questions. More of them.
I believe that the deliberative approach, the dialogue and the deliberation itself has a benefit to the democratic development itself. Just to involve, you already have the benefit. It's success from the process. But anyway, it seems it's like a long process, and it needs a lot of participation from a lot of actors or groups. And in that sense, from your experience, how important that we should include the policymaker into the process, because they're the main part to implement those suggestions. And if they don't have chance to participate, how can you convince them? Because most of the suggestions may be from other groups, and finally they have to implement those suggestions. Yes, that's the question. Thank you.
Well, I agree with almost everything you say. It's just that in practice there are often problems, because administrators, they like to be involved. In fact, administrators, officials, they love to be involved, and they enjoy these processes very often. Talking not only to your colleagues but also to citizens, they find often quite interesting. And you see friendships emerging in these groups between officials and citizens. Politicians don't like to be involved. And they have this idea that, well, we are elected, so in the end we are the ones that decide, and we want to have freedom to decide. I think that's not a good way to think about it, but I can't change it. But there are politicians, by the way, that begin to understand that this is not a good way to think about it. I've run into quite a few, and not only progressive politicians, but also conservative ones that think, no, we should listen much more to what the people want or what a broad group of societal actors want. So, I mean, one of the best examples at the moment is, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You might have heard of her. She's a very young American congresswoman, and she opens herself up to a very wide range of civil society actors, and then sort of processes that and comes up with great ideas and looks for alliances. I think that's a modern way of being a politician. Is that an answer? Yeah, okay. But your bigger point is it contributes to a richer, deeper form of democracy and democratic decision making. And that's my drive, my passion about all this. I didn't use the word democracy very much because that's almost a whole different, well, it's not a different story, but it's another can of worms. But that is what drives me.
Yeah, one last question, please.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now I'm doing research very close to your method.
Okay,
And so I
good.
have only one question. Have you ever had a situation that your participants had a big agreement, like a disagree from one side and another side?
All the time.
Yes. How can you deal with that situation?
Well, that's the methods of this designed deliberative platform. So deliberation is not just talking. Huh? Deliberation is a particular kind of talking, which the characteristics are that there's mutual respect, and if somebody doesn't show respect to another person, then the mediator, and I often operated as a mediator, points that out. So one way is to stimulate active listening to each other. So I would sometimes say, stop right here. I don't think you've been listening very carefully to what the other person said. So can you summarize it? And then the summary is terrible. And they say, okay, can you say it again? When there's a big argument, you can also try to clarify situation. So at some point, for example, the cities began to treat us like contract researchers. That's not what we were. We had a very different relationship, and the mediator, the funding organization, pointed that out. They said, well, you can treat them as contract researchers, but then you have to pay value-added taxes over the research, which is 20%. That was an argument that they understood. See what I mean? So there's many ways to resolve a conflict. There's a whole profession, conflict resolution. And so it happens all the time. Sometimes you just need to let people talk. So they have emotions, they have a history. Well, let them talk about it. How did it happen? How did you, and so on. Yeah? So it's a short answer to a big issue, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Hendrik, and everyone for this fruitful discussion. So I think we experienced that deliberative process by ourselves now. So it's like the time for reflections that would be in Thai, and we're gonna keep like only 30 minutes, so you can like avoid the very heavy traffic here in this area. ตอนนี้ก็จะเป็นเซสชันที่เป็น reflection จากคณาจารย์จากที่นิด้านะคะก็คือจะมีความเห็นยังไงบ้างกับสิ่งที่อาจารย์เฮนริกได้เลคเชอร์ไปเรื่องของวิธีการตีความแล้วก็การปรึกษาหารือในทางนโยบายสาธารณะนะคะก็จะเป็นเซสชั่นภาษาไทยแล้วก็อาจจะไม่เป็นทางการนักเดี๋ยวจะเป็นคนชวนคุยเองนะคะจะเสร็จภายในประมาณ30นาทีใช่ไหมคะอาจารย์เป็น agreement ร่วมกัน mutual agreement นะคะ Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. Okay. ท่านไหนอยากร่วมใช่